A huge tragedy occurred that day. Maine, the heroes quarreled, and one of them was indignant, asks if the second one knows what it is generally for the place, and wonders how he dared to come here. Heroine outraged, but trying to deliver the aggressor in place. Victory, I promise to return. But things turned out that way, circumstances that Ophelia will have to leave the duchy. Victoria happened to be born into a peasant family, living in a small village, into the environment of which she did not fit in any way. According to her father's most important things in life were money. In connection with this, he sold his daughter to an old landowner. But the main thing, the heroine was not happy with such a future, and the decision was made to flee from his native at home with Damon, who accidentally ended up in their village. Victoria and Damon began to live in a small town, and soon they had a beautiful daughter, Ophelia. Unfortunately, the main characters didn't have everything in life so smooth and rosy. It was too much quarrels, and at one point Victoria accepted the decision to take a little daughter and again run. Relationship Ophelia and her mother were never too much warm, always remained in them a certain chill. At the girls, there was always fear in the depths of my soul that at her slightest misbehavior Mom will just leave her and she will stay all alone. After leaving Ophelia's hometown, she happened to learn about the tragic death her father. Victoria met and fell in love with a handsome man, a young man whose name was Klaus. However, she was not destined to live a long life with him and have a happy life. Klaus very much fell ill and could not cope with the disease. Home, the heroine took death very hard, your beloved man. Nicole helped her come to her senses with her support. The girls became friends after these tragic events. Again, the acquired friend became often invite Victoria to high society. Mother Ophelia was very beautiful and spectacular. I was not a woman, and was not at all events deprived of male attention. Nicole, I decided to ask my friend not, does she like any of the new ones? Acquaintances. On her mind, only Raphael came, who unfortunately he was married, although this marriage was fictitious. Soon his wife became seriously ill, and before death asked Victoria to take care about her husband. Soon after the funeral, the main character came out, marry Raphael, and here around them, rumors spread that the whole friendship between her and Nicole was only for the sake of this marriage. When Ophelia was 19 years old, it happened again terrible. Raphael fell from his horse and died from his injuries. Victoria. I was very worried about this and wondered what was wrong with her and why such a terrible fate overtakes all her husbands. After that, as all the mourners left, appeared Raphael's friend Nicholas. He wanted to support the main character after such a loss. Nicholas decided to stay on the estate main characters. They often walked together with Victoria. At first, they felt awkward just holding hands in public. But after a short period of time, they are no longer embarrassed, spent time together, and showed their sympathy for each other. Soon after behavior and views of Mother Ophelia, I realized that my mother is going to get married again, and she will have a new stepfather. How it turned out that Nicholas's previous wife died shortly after giving it him a long-awaited heir. After moving the main characters to the estate, Ophelia's stepfather began to whisper around about that all three previous her mother's husband died in tragic circumstances. Many began to assume that the same fate may comprehend and Niclaxa. Despite to this, Alexander at their first acquaintance received Ophelia quite cordially. Asking if she was okay, they got there and immediately decided to call her sister. Ophelia was glad that she had a brother because she had never had brothers before and sisters. She opened up with the newly acquired brother and told him about it seemed that absolutely everything in this house, they wouldn't be happy to see her, and she didn't want to come here. Alexander in turn told her that at first he really didn't like it father's idea, some strange girl, so she will also have to be called sister. But now he is very glad that Ophelia and her mother showed up at their house. Certainly the girl was very pleased to hear such revelations from the brother, and she showed it with all her appearance. With them first meeting, Alexander timidly introduced himself to his sister. Meanwhile, she carefully examined her brother, noting how tall and handsome he is. Nellie attacked Ophelia and tried to kick her out of the house, even hitting her. But Alexander prevented this from happening, standing up for Ophelia and saying that his sister was suffering just like Nellie, and you shouldn't attack her like that. Nellie was, I'm outraged that Alex calls Ophelia your sister, because she was not yet accepted into the family and is a stranger to all of them. I thought so not only Nellie. Many in this house whispered behind the girl's back and said that she doesn't belong here. Ophelia, it was very hard to go through everything what is happening. In her thoughts, she constantly asked that they all stopped whispering and kept repeating myself. Imagine that very soon she will leave this house and will never appear in it again. Squeezing teeth so as not to cry, she ran away from his brother and Nellie, leaving them alone. But how as soon as she left the room in which everyone was there and the doors slammed behind her, Ophelia gave vent to her feelings and burst into tears what was wet. Home, the heroine thought that she should go through all this for the sake of your mother. For the sake of, in memory of her, she simply must attend her funeral, not despite the fact that she is in this house no one, because this is her mother. After all, mother's happiness was always more important than hers herself, Ophelia. I blamed myself for what happened. I thought that if she hadn't followed them, then that's it. It could have been completely different. And now she has no one at all. She stayed alone and doesn't know how she should be. Young woman came to the stables upset in hopes of calming down and finding peace of mind equilibrium. But after seeing horse, she wanted to run away immediately from this house and forget everything. How terrible it is a dream. She didn't want to believe that all this was happening to her. But where out of nowhere Alex appeared, who decided to ask where it was my sister got ready for the night watching. Home, the heroine was scared when she saw her brother, because she wanted to leave without saying goodbye to anyone without explaining anything. I thought for a moment how long ago he watches her, but in response only, she briefly said that she was leaving. Alexander, I didn't intend to let go so easily. It's not clear where my sister is going, and I decided to stop. Despite at this, the girl tried to break free and run away, but she couldn't do it. Guy was much stronger. Ophelia asked to explain and give the reason why Alex won't let her go. What is he on replied that she is the only adult, and if she leaves, then those in the house there won't be any more. And he also said that being alone on the road is not quite safe idea. Young woman, I didn't understand what her age had to do with it, has a brother at home. She said that I agree with what Nellie spoke out about the fact that she is not a member of their family. Alex invited her to immediately announce her his sister, but Ophelia, for some reason, she refused for her own reasons. Ophelia again asked the guy to let him let go, but suddenly saw tears on his cheeks and found herself perplexed. Young woman, I didn't know what to do and started reassure your brother by saying that she got excited and was wrong. But meanwhile, he admitted that he was afraid stay alone. Boy admitted that he was very glad to see new mother and sister, but without really having time to get used to them, he lost not only his mother, but also his father, and now it seems to him that he is abandoned. In that, Ophelia understood the moment. What's not only she feels lonely after this tragedy, and now they should be together and support each other. To the girl it seemed that if she left the house, then and Alex will only feel better about it. Ophelia confessed to her brother what she thought that no one is happy for her here, neither he nor himself the house, nor all the people around. In response, and Alex was open and honest with her, admitted that at first he was completely didn't like this idea, and how he was dissatisfied with the news that some girl will appear in the house, whom he will have to call sister. After Alexander suggested this conversation sister to go into the house and warm up a little, but before with this, he asked Ophelia to promise that she will never go anywhere again without warning him. But she could and did not want to promise this, because today she did not leave this house only because her brother wouldn't let her go. Ophelia told Alex that if she stayed on the estate, then around the area necessarily rumors will spread, because at least in the eyes of people they are brother and sister. But from that moment how they became so has only passed 1 month, and she doesn't understand for why should she stay there. Boy still didn't calm down, asking a bunch questions about what she doesn't I like it in this house, and ultimately asked if she really didn't think his brother. The only thing that I could answer all this with nothing a girl who doesn't understand is what to ask, what does he want from her? After which, with his eyes downcast, Alex asked his sister to stay in their house at least until he came of age, so that he could become a full-fledged duke. Ophelia is outraged that her brother asks her to stay on the estate for another 3 years, because only then will he turn 18 years old. but the guy promises her that he will take care of her and her safety, and he can also guarantee her that she will be completely safe. The main character agrees to stay and help her brother, but only on the condition that if suddenly, after he comes of age, she still wants to leave, he will not try to stop her. The girl believed Alex and decided to stay in the estate in order to support her brother. The next day, while eating, a man came into the dining room and apologized for being late. It turns out it was the brother of the late Nicholas. The man told everyone present that he tried very hard not to be late for the funeral, but it seems that due to the prevailing circumstances he failed. Seeing Ophelia, he asked if he was seeing the same girl, after which he turned to her with the words that she had experienced a very difficult situation. Nellie was outraged that Adrian did not notice her and was not paying any attention to her, to which the man answered her that, of course, she was also beautiful, but for some unknown reason he was more drawn to Ophelia. Inquiring about the young lady's age, he added that he was currently looking for a bride. Alex really didn't like his uncle's last remark and decided to reproach him, asking him if he had come here just for this. Adrian laughed it off and said that one does not interfere with the other. The grandmother, together with Nellie, offered to stay on the estate in order to help with business there. Nellie asked if she could move to another room, closer to Alex's room, arguing that this room was closer to the dining room, and so they could see each other much more often. She wanted to say something else, but the young man interrupted her and told the ladies that they shouldn't have bothered so much, that everything was fine. But Nellie stood her ground and argued that he simply needed help. And the grandmother reminded that there were no other adults in the house, and they simply had to help young Alex. Alex indignantly hit the table with his fist and reminded him that his sister was already an adult, and she was staying with him. Nellie simply lost her temper at this news and screamed throughout the entire dining room. Only now did Ophelia understand why her brother actually asked her to stay with him. The grandmother continued to insist that elders need to be listened to and that their help is simply necessary for the young man. The young man thanked them for their helping hand, but reminded them that because of them, all the servants in the house were suffering, and at this rate, there would soon be no maids left who could work. Heatedly, he asked how they wanted to help the estate even if they couldn't control themselves. By morning, everyone had left, and only Alex and Ophelia remained in the house. At breakfast, Alex inquired about his sister's condition because the abrasion on her face was very noticeable. The young man invited Ophelia to go to his room and share the medicine with her there. All the way while they walked to Alex's room, Ophelia wondered whether he would let her into his room. Ophelia remembered how a couple of weeks ago, during Alex's illness, she had already come here, and he didn't really like it. She could not understand what had changed during this time, why he had changed his attitude towards her so dramatically. While Alex was looking for medicine in the box, Ophelia accidentally noticed a black notebook and asked him if he kept a diary. Alex was at first sarcastic about the fact that she noticed this, but then he changed abruptly and asked not to tell anyone about it, because this was not a man's activity at all. Ophelia assured her brother that even if she really wanted to share this information, she simply had no one to tell it to. The main character finally found a miracle ointment and was about to treat his sister's abrasion, warning her that there might be some discomfort in the form of a burning sensation. Touching her hair, the guy said that he had never touched a woman's hair before and compared it to a spider's web. Ophelia replied that first of all, she was not a woman, but his sister. Alex was silent for a second with awkwardness, but eventually agreed with her. The young man finally began to treat the bruise, having first asked whether the girl would allow him to do this. At this moment, the main character caught herself thinking that every time she sees Alex, she only thinks about how handsome he is. His snow-white skin, face without any flaws. The girl often catches herself thinking that she herself is watching him without realizing it. After the guy carefully applied ointment to the abrasion without getting his hair dirty, the girl got ready to leave. But Alex pulled her back, asking if she really decided to leave him so quickly. Out of surprise, Ophelia got scared and asked Alex to be careful because he is still a man and she is a woman. Alex grinned and reminded her that a couple of minutes ago, she said that she was his older sister and not a woman. Ophelia thought for a moment that he was listening to her very carefully, but when she came to her senses, she clarified that biologically, she was still a woman. The girl thanked her brother for his concern, and he, in turn, told her that it was not difficult for him and handed over the ointment, explaining how it should be used. The main character thanked him again, but refused, saying that what had already been done was enough for her and left the room. Alex remained sitting in his room, clutching a tube of ointment in his hands and immersed in thoughts. He thought about her words that she was still a woman, and he was a man. Ophelia was in her room when someone knocked on the door. It was a maid who wanted to clean up the girl's room. She told Ophelia how beautiful the weather was today and suggested they go get some fresh air. Ophelia thought about the fact that before all the maids only whispered behind her back, and not one of them even thought of talking to her. They headed to the greenhouse, where Ophelia met Uncle Alex. He told her that he decided to stay for a few days, since he had not been to his brother's estate for a very long time. The man continued his monologue by saying that he is not going to use flattery in the affairs of the duchy, because he has plenty of his own possessions, and Ophelia stood all this time and thought that she should not have come to this greenhouse. The Count invited the girl to take a walk together since they had met here by chance. Ophelia was embarrassed to refuse, because the Count was Alex's closest relative, and they went for a walk together. Adrian asked the girl if she remembered what he was talking about last time, but she pretended that she did not understand him. Then he recalled that we were talking about the fact that he was looking for a bride and had heard that she was already of age. The man asked how he could be her husband, and the girl stood there and didn't understand how he could talk about marriage in such a difficult time for her. The uncle said that all he asks for is to give birth to 3 sons for him, and he doesn't need anything more. The girl wondered how he could ask for such a person who was good enough to be his daughter. At that moment, the maid came running very opportunely and told that Alexander was looking for Ophelia. The girl thought that all this was very strange, because Alex had never sent anyone after her. But taking advantage of the situation, she decided to leave. The Duke was outraged. He did not want to let the girl go and said that she did not have to immediately run to his nephew. But the maid again saved Ophelia and said that Alex was waiting for her immediately. The Count did not like this, but he could not do anything about it and was forced to retreat. Having found Alex, the girl found him in an inappropriate form and stared at his beautiful body. Being in her thoughts, she muttered about it. Alex, not understanding what was the matter, asked the girl again, and she, blushing and lowering her eyes, said that these were just thoughts out loud and asked him to forget about it. The girl asked why he was looking for her, but the young man did not understand the question, to which she replied that he was not looking. Alex tried to find out why she got it, and Ophelia, not understanding anything, began to tell her what the young fair-haired maid told her about it. Their conversation was interrupted by a young man, reminding Alex about the training, after which Alexander apologized and left, saying that most likely the maid was mistaken. But before leaving, he added that he was glad that, even under such circumstances, Ophelia saw him without a shirt, after which the guy started training. Ophelia sat in her room and wondered if Alex was serious when he said his last phrase. Her thoughts were interrupted by the appearance of the maid, who came to tell her that she had deceived her. The girl said that she saw the frightened expression on Ophelia's face and decided to come to the rescue. The young maid apologizes to Ophelia for lying to her and says that she only wanted to help. Ophelia offers the girl a good hand cream in gratitude and tells her that the girl helped her get out of a difficult situation with her lies. The girl is grateful to her mistress and tells her that she hasn't had such a good cream for a long time. The main character is surprised that the girl already had a good cream, despite her position, but does not demand details from where. She is interested in the name of this young girl. The girl said her name. Her name is Henrietta. Ophelia thought for a very long time about Henrietta's words, that she saw the fear on her face while washing the windows. But through this window, she herself can barely see the appearance of the gardener below, and there can be no question of the expression on his face. The girl was haunted by how the maid saw her facial expression. Ophelia walked through Alex's family library and admired the huge number of books, and then she accidentally stumbled upon a book of spells. She never thought that the Arpad family could be interested in such books. The girl heard snoring and thought it might be Alex. Ophelia approached him with thoughts about why he sleeps in the library and not in his own comfortable and soft bed. Alexander slowly approached the main character and whispered that she was very focused on reading. The girl, who did not expect to see him, thought about when he managed to wake up and why he approached so quietly, and said out loud only that he slept so sweetly and soundly, just like a baby. The guy did not deny this and admitted that he was very tired today. Ophelia asked her brother what book he had read and whether it was interesting. He briefly talked about the horrors that happened in the plot of the story and asked how she liked this book. She replied that she had not read the book herself, but judging by his description, she was simply terrible and hurried to leave. And Alex asked her if she was getting ready to go to bed. The girl said that it was high time for her to sleep, and she was thirsty. He asked her to stay, and he rang the bell, calling the maid. The door creaked slightly, and a young girl dressed as a maid ran into the library. Alex addressed her by name and asked her to bring them a drink, preferably something stronger. And then Ophelia remembered the morning conversation with Alexander, in which he assured that he did not remember the maids by name, but it was exactly that maid. It was Henrietta. The girl didn't understand why Alex lied to her, and not only did he lie, Henrietta also deceived her. After Henrietta brought the drinks, Ophelia asked Alex if alcohol would make him sick because he was still underage, but he hastened to reassure her by assuring her that he used to often drink with his father. After sitting for a while, Ophelia got ready to leave and go to bed. She wanted to tell Alexander about this, but he did not respond when she began to address him. But suddenly he spoke to her and said that it was time for her to stop calling him by his full name. The girl didn't understand why the young man had been trying to get closer to her lately, and she replied that she was not yet ready to call him anything else. After Ophelia left, Alex sat and thought about her words. He also remembered that for her sake he had to squeeze out tears, and she was still not ready to get closer. He realized that she was not as simple as he first thought. The young man again called Henrietta to him and reminded her that he did not order her anything, after which he clarified why she allowed herself too much. In her defense, the girl said that Ophelia was very lonely, and if Uncle Alex found out about this, he would begin to force her. Alex thought about the fact that Ophelia is very different from her mother. She does not interfere with men, does not depend on them, and does not strive for this, and thereby complicates his life. He thought that no matter how friendly he tried to be with her, she still pushed him away. He gets the impression that she draws a line between them that does not allow him to approach her. Since she tried to leave alone in the middle of the night to nowhere, then she is not afraid to stay on the street. But why? Alex told Henrietta to know her place and not cross the line. Henrietta came to Ophelia and told her that Alex was inviting her to have dinner together, but Ophelia refuses, citing the fact that she is not hungry. The young girl also clarifies that she heard that Ophelia has not yet chosen a personal maid, to which she agrees, saying that she is not comfortable being served in absolutely everything. Ophelia said that she used to have a favorite maid, and they often sat and chatted in her room. But one day, her very beautiful necklace disappeared, and her mother kicked out that girl. The necklace was found, but it was too late. Ophelia asked to return the maid, but she failed to convince her mother. Henrietta left to convey Ophelia's answer to Alex and wanted to return, but the girl said that there was no need to do this. Alex came to Ophelia with a phrase saying that you shouldn't skip meals. Then he said that his uncle intended to stay one more night and asked if she was okay, but understanding her answer from his eyes, he continued that he himself was not delighted with this idea. The young man himself invited Ophelia to join him for dinner. Meanwhile, Henrietta informs him that Ophelia chose her as her personal maid. The girl in her thoughts does not understand what happened because she did not choose anyone. She approaches Alex and says that she has appointed Henrietta, then takes him by the hand and offers to go to dinner because the Graf has already been waiting for them. Alex agrees, but says that he would like to hold her hand a little differently. He gently clasps her hand and looks deeply into her eyes, after which they head to Uncle Adrian's dining room. When everyone gathered at the table, Alex asked his uncle about his plans, because he was going to leave them after the meal, to which his uncle replied that he had changed his mind and decided to stay. He continued his story by saying that he could not leave because such a beautiful young girl remained on the estate, meaning Ophelia. He also noted that Alex is too young to manage everything alone. Alex grinned maliciously and repeated that he and his sister would handle everything just fine on their own. The uncle humiliated the girl, calling her a hillbilly and adding that she doesn't know anything about management, and she can cope with her goal only if she has a smart man next to her who will guide her in the right direction. Alex didn't like these words at all. He looked at Adrian menacingly, clenched his hand into a fist, and asked him not to allow himself so much. Adrian decided to ask Ophelia's opinion on this matter, but she expressed her agreement with her brother. The Count did not like her answer at all and asked her to give reasons why she did not want to marry him. The girl answered without hesitation that both age and appearance play against him. Alex burst into laughter, and his uncle became even more angry than before and began to find out what he found so funny. He got angry with Ophelia, began to raise his voice and shout that she thought too much of herself. Did she really think that she became part of their family only because she was sheltered here? To which Ophelia, without hesitation, replied that he himself was a very distant relative of the Arpads, and thereby put him in his place. All he could do was call Ophelia an impudent wench, but Alex shut him up, saying that this was the estate of the Arpad family, not his domain, and he should watch his language. Alex continued that he was tired of enduring his uncle's strange walks, during which he was always looking for something. The young man demanded that his uncle explain how the account book of their family got into his room. The uncle began to indignantly defend himself and shout that he had never seen this book and that someone had set him up. He tries to extricate himself and reminds Ophelia of their conversation during a walk, in which he mentioned that he has enough of his possessions. But the girl pretends that she doesn't understand what he's talking about at all, and only Ophelia knew that Adrian did not take this book, because it was she who gave it to him. An angry Adrian shouts out that he only asked her to marry out of pity and sympathy, but Ophelia pretends that she doesn't understand anything and has nothing to do with what happened. She wonders what made the man so angry. Adrian continues to blame Ophelia for everything. This gets pretty annoying for Alex, and he asks that this gentleman be taken out of the premises. The girl remembered how one night she sneaked into the office of the deceased Duke and found this book there. She stole it on purpose. Once the book was in her hands, little remained to be done. All she had to do was sneak into Adrian's room unnoticed and plant the notes. While the Count was being taken out by the servants, he continued to furiously shout unflattering remarks about the girl, and she said in a calm tone that he had changed too dramatically because just recently he wanted to see her as his wife. The Count continued to scream hysterically and ask her to confess to what she had done. Alex again stood up for his sister, and now accusations began to fall on him. His uncle began accusing him of dancing to her tune and that she was twisting him around as she wanted. Ophelia hoped that no one in the huge mansion heard them and that those around them would not find out about what happened. Alexander asked to open the gates since his uncle was leaving them immediately. The Count tried to get out and asked his nephew to listen to him. He said that all this was some kind of misunderstanding. Alex screamed sharply, asking him to wait. The Count thought that his nephew decided to listen to him, and again began to escalate the fact that only Ophelia was to blame for everything. However, the young man simply remembered that his uncle arrived on the carriage of the Duchy of Apad. One of the servants confirmed his words, after which Alex decided that this crew should be returned to the duchy. The frightened uncle began to worry how he would get home in this case, because if he rode on horseback, it would take a whole week. Alex looked at his uncle with a grin and said that such a smart man would definitely come up with something and get out of this situation. When he was taken away, the grave begged to give him a carriage and promised to return it immediately after returning home. Adrian called Alex for a long time, hoping that he would take pity on him. Ophelia sighed with relief and thought that there was finally silence in the room. After all this, Alex waved his hand, thereby asking the servants to leave and telling them not to disturb them. Then he spoke to his sister, asking her to tell her why she started all this. The girl was in a stupor. She could not even think that the young man had guessed everything. She looked up at him and asked him to clarify what he meant. Alex sighed, saying that he didn't think he could get the truth. Taking out a long silver hair from his pocket, he said that he found it in the office. The guy understood that he had taken the girl by surprise, and that's why she didn't say anything. He was very interested in what she would say in her defense. But the only thing he heard was that this couldn't be. There was no way her hair could have ended up in his office. She continued by saying that the office was always closed and she could not get there. And in general, the only one who has access to the office is him. Alex sat and thought that he hated all this. The way she paused at the end of sentences, the way she looked, her soft, enveloping voice. He had the feeling as if her presence was shackling him in chains. This feeling arose in him even in their first meeting, at the very moment when the girl got out of the carriage. It seemed to him then that she was surrounded by an ominous atmosphere. All the troubles of this world seemed to follow her. Even then, he wanted to squeeze Ophelia in his arms and not let her go. His thoughts were interrupted by Ophelia calling him by his short name for the first time. She finally called him Alex. He tried to understand whether she really called him that, or whether it was just his imagination. The girl asked him to honestly tell her whether he really found her hair in the office. Alex looked at the girl and saw her confidence and steadfastness. He thought about the fact that he could have made a mistake, but he remembered the hair lying on the carpet and realized that there could be no mistake. Ophelia turned to the guy, saying that before he made accusations, she didn't even have the slightest idea about what was happening. The young man thought for a moment, and he said that the girl would not deceive him, and he believed her. But without his permission, no one could enter the office. The girl looked at him with sad eyes and asked if this was why he doubted her. She continued more cheerfully by asking if he truly believed that his servants could not have done this. On reflection, Alex realized that that day Ophelia came running to him because of Henrietta. It was she who told the girl that he was looking for her. Alex asked the butler to immediately find and call Henrietta. After the girl arrived, Alex directly asked her if she had taken the account book, to which the girl replied that it was she who found her in the count's room and told the young master about the find. The young man began to get a little angry and said that this was not what he meant. The girl looked at the gentleman in fear and repeated many times that she did not understand what was being said. Alex grinned and said that he didn't really understand that the maid was so stupid or pretending to be so good, after which he continued by saying that the girl had long ago lost his trust. He remembered how he met Henrietta as a child. His father brought her into the house and said that now she would live here. The girl refused to go to school and remained as a servant in Alexander's family. The father then did not understand why Henrietta made such a decision, but Alex knew everything from the very beginning, back in those old days. One night she came to his room and suggested that they spend the night together. He knew perfectly well what feelings she had for him. Alex returned his thoughts to the present and continued the conversation. He turned to the maid, saying that she had the opportunity to get Ophelia's hair and throw it into the office. But he doesn't understand why she went to the count's room, because part of the house is outside her area of responsibility. The girl tried to justify herself by saying that she was sent there because there were not enough servants in the house. But this made Alex even more furious. He was outraged by what the girl said about the shortage of workers on his estate. The girl stood upset in front of the young gentleman, making excuses by saying that she had never lied to him and asking why he didn't believe her. Alex again plunged into his thoughts. He thought that he was annoyed by this whole situation, and Ophelia was also watching all this, who had only recently stopped calling him by his full name, and he began to hope that they would get closer. He was worried that after all this, the girl would move away from him again. And for this reason, he asked the maid to leave him and Ophelia alone, adding that they would return to this conversation later. But the main character got up from the table and asked permission to leave first. Alex wanted to stop her, but the girl replied that she was already full and simply had no desire to sit here. The young man noticed that she had not touched the main dish and said that since arriving at their house, she had lost a lot of weight, and from now on, he would monitor her meals. Ophelia smiled and said that this was not at all necessary and asked not to scold Henrietta too much. Alex was outraged and surprised at the same time that the girl was defending the maid and asked why she was standing up for her because she was trying to set her up. Ophelia was lost in her thoughts. She remembered a story from childhood when her necklace disappeared, and her mother punished the maid for this, who said that the girl herself hid it somewhere. After she came to her senses, she only said that she was simply already accustomed to this girl. Henrietta made excuses for a very long time to Ophelia, and said that she did not plant anything anywhere and in fact accidentally stumbled upon the book in the Count's room. She asked Ophelia to trust that she would never harm the lady she served. Ophelia continued to tell the maid about the story with the necklace. She told her that her mother kicked the maid out for a reason. She was afraid that the girl would do something to her. Ophelia turned 23 years old. She stood at the window and watched the blizzard. She really liked this weather. Suddenly, Alex came up to her and asked if she was tired of watching the same landscape, to which the girl replied that she needed to capture everything in her memory while she was still here. Alex grinned at him, who was already 19 years old at that time, and said that his sister spoke as if she was about to suddenly disappear somewhere. The young man immediately put the book on the table and headed towards his sister. The guy asked her not to use such phrases and to think about him at least for a minute, because he would be left completely alone if she left. He came even closer, touched her, inhaled her scent, and noticed that today she was more fragrant than usual. Alex asked if she wore perfume today. The girl pushed him away and moved away a little. The young man thought about the fact that he had allowed himself a little too much, and Ophelia noticed this and said that someone could have seen them. Alex turned everything into a joke and said that in this case, this person would admire their warm family relationship. Ophelia thought about his words. It was as if they were ignoring each other yesterday, but over the past 3 years, a lot has happened, and they have become very close. The girl took Alex's book and asked if he still reads such scary books. She leafed through the book and wondered what attracted him to such strange stories where children kill their parents. Giving the book to the young man, she noted that he had a very specific taste. Alex grinned and said that they stimulate the thought process. Ophelia asked him if he wanted to convey something else to her with these books. At that moment, a button came off on the young man's shirt, and the conversation itself changed its course. Picking up the button, Alexander said that when he put on the shirt, the button barely held on. Unfortunately, it didn't last long. Alex said that Henrietta was away, and he didn't know what to do with the torn button, and the girl suggested calling him another maid. The young man sighed sadly and said that so be it. Someone will sew him up later. He is in no hurry now. Ophelia smiled, realizing that this was exactly what her brother was trying to achieve, and extended her hand to him, offering her help. The girl took out a large and beautiful box in which she kept threads and needles. Alex began to take off his shirt so the girl could sew it up, and she, surprised, asked if he didn't want to change her clothes. But the guy replied that there was no need for this because she had already seen him in this form once and even praised his body. The girl felt embarrassed because she thought that he had not heard these words then. He asked his sister why she was so excited because nothing could happen between them. Ophelia thought for a moment and then said, of course, because if something happens, then there will be trouble. She took the shirt and began to sew back the torn button. While sewing, she started a conversation with her brother, asking if he thought that with a wife, it would be much easier for him to manage the house. Alex grinned and asked if he wasn't too young to get married. He began to be indignant that even his sister treated him like a child, always muttering that he should not drink and go to bed in the morning. The girl replied that everything was clear to her. Distracted by a conversation with her brother, the girl almost pricked her finger. Alex, who noticed this, rushed to her and took her hand, asking her to be careful because she could inject herself. Ophelia was not ready for such closeness, and something happened inside. She felt awkward, but at the same time so pleasant and good. At this time, the butler knocked on the door and asked if the young master was busy. Alex allowed him to enter, and the door opened. The butler appeared at the opened door and announced the arrival of the guests. A tall, fair-haired guy appeared at the door and asked if he could disturb Alexander. While putting on his shirt, Alex replied that he had already disturbed him. The young man apologized and introduced himself. His name is Claude. The young man said that there was no need to be wary. He would not cause any harm to Alex. After which he showed a gold ID with a lion. It was the ID of a first-class state investigator. Claude suggested that without delay, we get straight to the point and began to narrate. He recalled what happened exactly 3 years ago, the death of the Duke and his wife and all the details. However, the investigation made a discovery and found out that Nicholas and his wife did not die by accident. It was a carefully planned murder. The young people listened very carefully to the investigator and tried to understand his words. After all, they could not even think that someone could wish death on their parents. He offered to quickly bring Alex and Ophelia up to date with all the findings. The investigator continued his story. Everyone present here knows that the carriage fell from a cliff, but the investigation found out that the wheel fastenings were deliberately weakened by someone. Tears rolled down from the girl's eyes, and she muttered her wish that the criminals be found as soon as possible. The investigator expressed his solidarity with the girl. The man said that the carriage caught fire due to friction, after which he asked if they had seen anyone suspicious that day. The girl said that before they left, she slept a little, but from what she can remember, she did not see anyone strange or alarming. The investigator closed his notebook and asked who in God would do such a thing to the crew. The girl thought about it and said that all these people could not be counted on one hand. She did not know who wished this for the Duke, but her mother had too many ill-wishers. She had too many envious people, she continued, after which Ophelia asked if Claude had any more questions. To this he replied that for now there were no more questions, but if they arise in the future, he will find her. After all the work issues were resolved, the man asked if he and Ophelia had met before. The girl replied that she could not remember meeting him. The investigator laughed it off, asking whether he was so easy to forget. Everyone said that for an investigator he was nothing at all. Ophelia called him funny, and he in turn thanked her for the compliment. After this conversation, the girl stood up and said that if that was all, then it was time for her to go. Claude thanked her for her assistance, and she promised to help in any way she could. The investigator complimented Ophelia, saying that although it is not customary in his profession to voice personal opinions, he really likes her beautiful smile, but most likely you hear this quite often. The girl became embarrassed and said that it is always very pleasant to hear compliments, and this does not depend at all on the frequency with which they are said. Leaving the room, Ophelia tried to calm herself down, convincing herself that this happened a long time ago, and that 3 whole years had passed since that moment. The girl remembered that that day she found syringes in the dressing room, and she burned them, every single one. Nothing at all survived. Claude must not find out about them. No one must know about this. Ophelia must take her mother's secret with her to the grave. After this, the girl met Alex, who noticed her high spirits. She was alarmed by her brother's condition. Judging by the expression on Alexander's face, he is still angry, but he can be understood. As the head of the house, such things should be unpleasant for him. Alex asked the detective how he dared to start an investigation without asking permission from the owner of the house. The detective, with a malicious smile on his face, showed the warrant and said that he had already received permission from the palace and did not need the permission of the owner of the house. The investigator wanted to start the interrogation face-to-face and said that since the gentleman was not ready for this conversation right now, he would like to start the interrogation with Ophelia. He approached the girl and put his hand on her shoulder. She was not ready for this, but agreed to start the conversation. Seeing this, Alex became even more gloomy than before. Later at dinner, Claude paid a lot of attention. He said that she was like a breath of fresh air here. Then he asked whether it was true that after Alexandra came of age, Ophelia was going to leave the estate. Ophelia confirmed that this is so, and this issue has long been resolved. Hearing these words, Alex became so angry that he clenched his fist and bent his fork. But the man still did not let up. He asked where she had gone, and the girl replied that she would like to visit the Vatican. He laughed and said that he liked this place, and he had always dreamed of climbing the stairs of the saints. The man continued by saying that every step you overcome helps you cleanse yourself of sin. Ophelia flirtatiously asked if he had really sinned so much, but he replied that with his misdeeds, he would not have had the chance to become an investigator. Then he told about another legend, which says that if 2 people walk up the stairs holding hands, then nothing and no one can separate them. Claude asked if Ophelia would like to go up these steps with someone and then winked at her, and the girl expressed her assumption that he would like to keep her company, but he replied that he did not mean that at all, but if she understood it that way, then he would not mind hearing the answer. Alex sat and listened to their conversation, which he did not like at all. He thought that only Ophelia, who had allowed him to approach her, was moving away from him again, and this man was to blame. After the meal, Ophelia decided to leave the dining room first, but Alexander asked her to wait for him. She looked at him and asked what was the matter, because his plate was not empty yet. Then she quipped and asked whether he thought she was again in an overly elated mood. The girl changed her tone and continued saying that she understood that Alex doesn't like the presence of the investigator, but he can't blame her for being in some kind of high spirits after they were told such news about the death of their parents. She asked if he really. Alexander thinks that she cannot get angry. Alex corrected her, saying that he didn't like it when she called him by his full name. The girl got angry, asking if it was important at the moment, and the guy replied that it was always very important for him. Having calmed down a little, the young man said that he should not have talked about it, but she made a fool of him. He asked her to stay so many times, but every time she ignored his words. Alex doesn't understand how she can talk to that man like that. Ophelia stood there and didn't understand what hurt him so much, what made him so angry. They didn't fight about it for 3 whole years, and today some investigator was able to upset him so much. She didn't understand what he really wanted from her. The girl reminded him that he himself had given his word that after he came of age, he would let her go. Alexander said that you can always give another word, but Ophelia screamed. If it were that simple, she would have done it already. Alex's ears were already ringing. He approached the girl, hugged her, and in a calm voice told her that everything was fine and they were in no hurry, and then asked her to explain what she wanted to say. Ophelia stood silent and did not know what to say. A little later, she pulled him aside and apologized. The girl said that they couldn't stand like that because the investigator could see them, and the young man was upset because she was worried about a stranger's man more than about him. Ophelia asked him to pull himself together because normal relatives don't behave like that, but he became even more upset and asked her only one question. He asked if they were just normal relatives for her. She asked him to stop because such conversations with him exhaust her very much. She thought to herself, if they are not normal relatives, then exactly who they are to each other. The girl didn't understand what he wanted. Did he really want to just stop playing brother and sister for no reason at all? The guy admitted that she touched him to the quick, that after so many years spent together, he means nothing to her. A tear rolled down his cheek. Alex gently hugged Ophelia and again asked if he really meant nothing to her. The girl hugged him back and asked if she had ever told him that he meant nothing to her, and added that he shouldn't invent too much. Alex asked what exactly the girl didn't like, and she stood silently, looking at him and thinking that just a few minutes ago she was simply seething with anger. But when she saw the tears on his eyelashes, she couldn't help but admire him. Ophelia wiped a tear from his cheek and said that she did not like to see his tears. He looked at her and said that this was not so. Ophelia thought for a moment. She did not know what to answer him. Alex added that she loves his tears. He added that she is only kind to him in such moments. The girl stood enjoying the fact that he was nearby and thought that everything was happening as usual. Their conflict was fading away. She understood that all her anger evaporated immediately as soon as she saw a tear on his cheek. Ophelia suggested going upstairs and going to their rooms because their petty quarrels were completely useless in the current situation. She didn't want to be accused of making the Duke cry. He agreed with his sister, took her hand, and they went upstairs. Having escorted Ophelia to her room, he wished her good night and headed to his room. The girl heard something and ran out of her room. She headed down the stairs. It seemed to her that the sound was coming from there. There she met Henrietta, who had returned from vacation ahead of time. Ophelia told her since she had returned, she needed to rest today and get to work tomorrow. But in her thoughts, the maid was not so kind to Ophelia. She thought that this was the last time she would look down on her. In the last few years, she has practiced magic a lot, and now she can defeat even Ophelia. And Alexander will have no choice but to give her a second chance. Ophelia asked what Henrietta was thinking about so intently and whether she wanted to share something with her. The girl just shook her head negatively. Ophelia remembered that the girl hung out in the library all the time, and it was unlikely that she did this in order to see her and Alex alone. Was she really preparing a little revenge for them all this time? Ophelia took her hand and said that she was going to forgive her all her sins and let her stay as her maid as she wanted. Ophelia asked the girl if this was how she wanted to repay for this. Henrietta sat and did not understand how this was possible because Ophelia absorbed all her magic without any difficulty. Ophelia told the maid that after she left, this place would be hers, so she shouldn't waste her energy. After Ophelia crushed her magic, the girl will not be able to move for some time. Early in the morning, there was a knock on Ophelia's room. When she opened the door, she was very surprised and asked Investigator Claude a question, and he asked to call him simply by his name. She corrected herself and asked Claude why he came to her so early. The investigator felt slightly uncomfortable and said that he needed to clarify some details with her, but that he should probably return a little later. The girl held him back by grabbing his sleeve and asked him to ask all the necessary questions. Ophelia smiled flirtatiously and asked what the investigator wanted to ask her about. While the man was thinking about how to formulate the questions, she recalled the events of the previous night. The previous night was eventful. Cold could see her together with Alex, or he could have noticed how she used magic in her showdown with Henrietta. The investigator broke the silence and spoke. He wanted to find out something about Alex. The girl was surprised and said that with every word he said, she became more and more curious. The man told her that on the first day of his stay at the estate, he went to the Duke's room to search it. With great dissatisfaction, Alexander still let him into the room and allowed him to inspect his personal belongings, in which the personal diary of the young Duke was found. And as soon as Cold wanted to open it and read it, the young man immediately kicked him out of the room. At this moment, the Duke's gaze spoke of his great desire to kill the investigator. The man, of course, understands that the diary is a personal thing, but such a violent reaction from the young man made him think. Ophelia wondered if Alex had something he was desperately trying to hide. She herself began to wonder what her brother was hiding. Ophelia told the investigator that Alex was very sensitive about personal belongings, and he suggested that she take a walk around the village, since the weather outside was beautiful. The girl invited the investigator to inspect her room since he had already arrived, but he replied that he would not dare to detain her any longer. She saw through the window the investigator getting into the carriage and again plunged into her thoughts. The girl remembered that Alex said that he loved to read and always went to the library with her, but there were never any books in his room. And now it turns out that he was hiding a personal diary. Ophelia was interested in the question of what Alexander was trying so carefully to hide from everyone. The girl noticed that a maid was coming out of his room, who had just cleaned the room and changed his bed linen. This means that no one will enter the room until Alex returns. The girl knew that the investigator had left, and Alexander was currently training, and she decides to sneak into her brother's room. Ophelia begins her search from the desk drawers, and in one of them she finds that very diary of Alexander. She opens the diary to look at his entries, but the first page is blank. Opening the next page, the girl is very surprised, because today's date is on it. Then she is amazed at what she sees more and more. Everything in the diary is filled with questions about why she is spying. The girl does not understand what this means and thinks about who her brother was waiting for her, or the investigator, and for whom he left this fake diary. But she still decides to see what happens next. She breathed a sigh of relief after seeing that all the other pages of the diary were with normal entries. She finds a recording of the day on which she and her mother arrived at the Arpad estate. Alex writes that he has a stepmother and compares her to a beautiful angel, and adds that he understands his father's words about falling in love at first sight. He further said that after his stepmother he saw Ophelia, and she was no less beautiful. His heart began to beat wildly and almost burst out of his chest when he approached her to say hello. The guy talked about his feelings and did not understand why his heart did not stop and continued to beat so wildly. Because of this, he was unable to properly greet the girl. Alex was afraid that he was sick, but the doctor assured him otherwise, saying that the guy was healthier than all the healthy ones. The guy did not understand what this symptom could mean. Ophelia noticed that the entries in the diary began exactly from that day, and she wanted to read a little more. In the next entry, the guy talked about breakfast. It seemed to him that Ophelia was unpleasant in his company and uncomfortable with him, and therefore sat away from her. He wanted to wish her bon appétit, but he could not talk to her. The girl remembered this moment perfectly. Reading all these entries, the girl thought that this was the most ordinary diary, and there was nothing in it except personal thoughts and experiences. But she didn't understand why he attacked Claude then, and why he wrote such a terrible inscription at the very beginning. Then he told his diary about the day when the whole family first gathered at one table. That night, due to his heart escaping from his chest, Alex had difficulty falling asleep. He tried for a very long time to calm his frantic heartbeat, but he did not manage to sleep. He was woken up by a knock on the door. It was Henrietta. She picked up the old ways again and began offering to spend the night with her. Summer was long over, and she stood in front of the guy in a thin nightgown. Ophelia thought that after reading such news, she was not at all surprised. This maid had always been a petty swindler. All other entries turned out to be very monotonous. She couldn't find anything unusual or scary in Alex's diary. The girl already wanted to put the diary back in its place, but I noticed something strange and began to look for this recording again. This recording was made on the day my parents died. In it, Alex talked about how, during a trip around their property, he noticed that the wheels of the carriage were loose, and after he noticed this, he had a brilliant idea. The girl immediately thought that this brilliant idea could be connected with the tragedy that had occurred. She wondered if Alexander could have arranged this accident. And then she realized that Alex had returned from training ahead of time, and she urgently needed to leave. After looking around the room, she realized that there was absolutely nowhere to hide. The door burst open, and Alexander entered the room. Ophelia hid behind the table, shaking, and was afraid of being discovered. With every step Alex took, her heart began to pound faster and faster. Out of fear, she covered her mouth with her hand so as not to accidentally scream. These few minutes lasted an eternity for her, but she still could not figure out how to get out of the situation. Ophelia didn't understand why her brother returned from training so early today, because usually training took much longer. The girl assumed that her brother was going to take a shower after training, and she assumed that this would be a good opportunity for her to escape and remain unnoticed. But Alexander took out some kind of note from his pocket and began to read it. While reading, he looked very worried, and the girl noticed this. The girl suggested that something might have happened during training. Her thoughts were suddenly interrupted by the fact that the Duke had just spoken her name. This made the girl shudder and could not understand why her brother said her name. He called her by name, and not sister, as he most often did. Why is there such pain on his face while saying this? After some thought, Alexander finally headed into the shower and closed the door behind him. Ophelia decided that now was her only chance to get out of Alex's room unnoticed and started running. But as she left the room, she noticed a note left by the Duke on the sofa. Taking the piece of paper in her hands, she noticed her portrait on it. Running out of the room, she did not understand why her brother was looking at this drawing with such an alarmed look. After everything that happened, Ophelia returned to her room and tried to collect her thoughts while sitting on the bed. She did not understand how she should behave further and what to do. Is it worth sneaking into his room again and trying to read that ill-fated entry? The main character did not have time to read too much, and therefore could not understand what kind of brilliant idea came into Alex's head that day. Claude is still away, and she only needs to beware of Alex. The girl really wouldn't want yesterday's situation to happen again. Her thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Alex who came. He asked if she was there. The girl thought that she would seem more suspicious if she pretended that she was not in the room. She thought that before opening the door, she needed to calm down. Opening the door, Ophelia asked what brought Alex to her early in the morning, after which she added that he became an early bird, to which the guy smiled and said that he began to get up a little earlier than usual. Alex told his sister that he was going to supervise the snow removal on their property, and she concluded for herself that in the next few hours, no one would be able to stop her from getting into his room. Ophelia invited Alex to accompany him. The girl saw the Duke off and waited until he rode off on his horse. She couldn't even imagine that the opportunity to get into the room and read Alex's note would come to her so soon. However, when she approached the door, the girl realized that it was locked, and she would not be able to get into the room so easily. The girl wondered if he always locked the door with a key when leaving the estate, or if he suspected that there was someone in the room in his absence. Ophelia did not understand what to do in this situation because she could not melt the lock, but had done it the previous time. Suddenly, Alex came up to her from behind and said that in this way she would not be able to open the door. The girl didn't understand when he managed to return and why she didn't hear him. Ophelia did not understand how he managed to follow her and remain unnoticed. Alex asked his sister if she was going to melt the castle this time too. After these words, the girl got scared because she didn't understand how much he knew about her. Alex threw the key to his room into her palm, after which the girl was able to open the door. Alex took her by the shoulders and asked how long she planned to stand on the threshold. She didn't understand what to do and whether she should enter his room as if nothing had happened. Alexander entered the room, and she continued to stand on the threshold and think why he was inviting her to enter. She did not understand whether he knew that she had read his diary. She urgently needs to figure out how to get out of this situation. Alex pointed out to her that she had not been very careful this time, but the girl pretended not to understand anything. The Duke made an argument in his favor by saying that he found her hair in the room. He asked the girl if she was planning something again like last time, and if not, what aroused such interest in her that she decided to sneak into his room in his absence. Alex handed her his diary, but the girl pretended that she didn't know what it was. Then he asked if it was not him that she wanted to read. He handed her the diary again, but she replied that she wouldn't take him because she didn't want him to overstep himself just to please her. He replied that he expected to hear such an answer from her, after which he continued that now he had nothing to hide from her and she should take the diary. Alex said he knew everything from the moment the investigator entered his room. She knew that the investigator would run to her and tell her about how Alex kicked him out the door. Ophelia was surprised and asked, "It turns out that Alex was waiting for her to sneak into his room, and that's why he left these terrible warnings." He agreed with all her words. He hoped that she would not read it after all, but it was in vain. She told him that he had nothing to worry about because she did not have time to read everything to the end. Alex didn't believe it, but the girl assured him that she had no reason to deceive him. But Alexander was sure that she had enough time. The Duke asked if she heard everything when she was hiding under the table. The girl confirmed his guesses and said that he whispered her name. The only thing Alex could mutter was that he was terribly ashamed. Alexander asked Ophelia to erase this from her memory, but she replied that she was not sure that she could do this. The girl thought that she was waiting for a different turn of events, but she could still accept Alex's offer and read the diary. She took the diary in her hands and began to read. The entry that she opened talked about a dinner at which they were alone. The young man shares with the diary that it was real torture for him. Alex wrote that he couldn't listen to his voice at all, and he had to avoid such meals for some time. The girl remembered this evening very well. On that day, her mother went on her honeymoon. She remembered how her mother and the Duke, carefree and happy, got into the carriage. Ophelia suggested that the next entry would be about the day of the disaster. The main character read in the diary that on a day that did not at all foretell trouble, they were notified of a terrible incident. Alexander could not believe that all this was actually happening. It seemed to him that he was dreaming. He was told that the crew skidded on ice. His stepmother died on the spot, and his father was immediately taken to the hospital, but he never opened his eyes, and so they were both gone. The investigation began immediately, and they also found out that the wheels were to blame. But some things didn't add up. After all, only the other day the wheels were replaced with new ones. The girl read this entry and could not understand anything at all. Ophelia asked Alex if he really ordered the wheels on the carriage to be replaced. The girl continued to say indignantly that she did not understand what a brilliant idea he had written about earlier. She finds this passage in the diary and shows him the exact phrase. It said that as soon as he looked at them, he had an idea. Alexander asks if he really needs to answer, to which the girl asks him to do this if he doesn't want her to suspect him. And he tells her that that day he used the change of tires to ride with her around their property. Ophelia asked him not to joke with her like that, to which he replied that he was being honest with her now. He asked her if she didn't remember that he invited her to ride with him. The girl remembered that then he actually said something to her. The Duke then invited her to take a walk in the fresh air at least once, but she told him that in such a cold weather she was not really drawn to the street. She indignantly asked how she was supposed to guess what he wanted from her. The young man took her hand, smiled sweetly, and said that before in her presence he could not put together a few words, but now he conveys his thoughts much better. Ophelia cried out that this was not the point now, but that because of this phrase in the diary, she began to treat him with great distrust. The girl only now realized why all this time he treated her with such warmth and tenderness. It took her reading his diary to understand this. He himself didn't notice how he fell in love with her at first sight. After all these discoveries, she wanted to read the diary to the end. In one of the entries, he says that he is sure that Ophelia knows something about the accident, because when he was putting things in order in his father's office, he found a syringe on one of the shelves. Ophelia didn't understand how this could happen because she thought that she had burned all the syringes. Alex asked her to read everything to the end, despite the fact that she might not like further entries. And then she saw the same recording in which the guy admits to himself that he loves Ophelia like a man loves a woman. It cannot be otherwise, because at the sight of her, his heart begins to pound like mad, as if it is ready to jump out of his chest. In the next note, Alex writes that he has found the true cause of the tragedy, and it lies in the molten axle. She was melted as well as the lock in the office. Whether Henrietta could have done this remains a question. One day the maid asked her to drive Ophelia away. Apparently she had gone completely crazy. She didn't belong next to him. Henrietta says that Ophelia is a magician. Could this be true? Sometimes he had thoughts that Ophelia was behind all this. But how could she be a murderer? If so, then he loves the woman who killed his father. He could not allow the girl he loved to leave, regardless of whether she was involved in the death of his father. In almost every last entry, Alex begs Ophelia not to leave. In one of the entries, he writes that there are only 2 weeks left until he comes of age, and it is vital for him to come up with something for her to remain on the estate. While returning the book to Alex, the girl thought that Alex still suspected her. How could he think that it was she who killed her own mother and his father? He suspected her for 3 whole years. The girl asked him if he could love a woman who may have killed his father. Out of surprise, the young man dropped the diary from his hands. But after a pause, Ophelia continued, saying that she did not do it. She screamed that she was not a murderer and was in no way involved in everything that happened. Alexander frightenedly asked his sister not to scream, but she didn't let up. The girl began to shake him by the shirt and repeat the same phrase, which said that she was not guilty of anything. She wondered how he could doubt her for so many years. After everything that happened, the girl simply burst into tears. It was too difficult for her to digest this information. Alexander asked her to let him explain and listen to him carefully. He didn't want to make her cry and see her in this state. He just couldn't hide his diary anymore, especially since now there was also an investigator constantly hanging around there. Ophelia asked him that he still suspected her and suggested that it was because of this that he read such terrible books in which children kill their parents. He also deliberately waved them in front of her nose. She thought how tough Alex was. All this time, he hinted to her that she was to blame for the death of her parents. He hinted that he knew the truth and wanted her to understand it. Alex tried to calm his sister down, but she screamed, asking him not to touch her. The girl assumed that Alexander was keeping her on the estate only because he wanted to see her executed. The young man tried to explain to her that this is not so, but unfortunately, all his attempts were unsuccessful. Ophelia simply did not try to hear him. Screaming, she asked if he wanted to know the whole truth. The girl remembered how long she kept her mother's secret, and all only because she was afraid of losing her. She tried to leave, saying that she had had enough. Alexander again tried to stop the girl and asked her to listen to him. He said that after Ophelia read the diary, she should understand everything, but the girl just waved him off and said that she had already heard enough. The Count grabbed his sister and asked her if she really believed that he was waiting for her execution. However, the girl didn't care what he wanted. She only wanted him to let her go. Alexander was not ready for his sister to just turn around and leave without giving him the opportunity to explain himself. Ophelia threatened him with her magical power and asked him to let her go while he still had the right to choose. She told him that if he did not let her go, she would be forced to use her force. The young man asked if she would kill him, to which the girl tried to calm him down, promising that it would never come to that. She clarified that he would only feel a light slap on his wrist. Alex closed his eyes with sadness and thereby gave her the will to act as she saw fit. The girl did not expect such a reaction from her brother to her threat. He continued to hold her wrist and said that if this was her will, then he was ready to accept it. The young man continued that even if she wants to take his life, he will open his heart and be ready to accept her and everything connected with her. The young count's eyes sparkled with tears filling them, but the girl screamed that she was not joking and demanded to let her go. He put her action-ready hand to his temple and said that he was as serious as she was. Ophelia gathered her strength and calmed down, absorbing her magic, which was already ready for further action. Alexander gently took the girl's hand and whispered that he was sure that she would not do anything bad to him. after which the guy asked her if she had stolen their account book. The girl calmly replied that he knew about everything and simply closed his eyes to what happened. Then she remembered the diary entry about the syringe he had found and inquired about it. Alexander suggested that his father might need him for health reasons. Ophelia was indignant and asked if he was serious, to which the guy replied that there was no point in this because she wouldn't tell him anything anyway. The girl did not understand why her brother was ready to pretend that he did not understand anything. After all, this is nonsense that for some reason a healthy young man suddenly needed injections. Ophelia asked what the young duke knew, and he calmly replied that something would change if he told her about it. The girl, in despair, repeated again that she did not kill her mother. She loved her and was very afraid of losing her. Alex tried to calm her down and asked her not to torment herself. He hugged her and told her that it was no longer important to him. Now he doesn't care whether she's guilty or not. The girl wanted to say something to her brother, but could not find the words. Alexander asked her not to rush. He was ready to wait in order to listen to her. Ophelia looked at him and thought that she needed to say at least something. There was deathly silence for some time, and the girl suddenly heard the phrase about 3 seconds. The young man said that in 3 seconds he would kiss her. Then he added that if she was against it, she should hit him in the face. Ophelia thought that despite all his bold words, he was very afraid of the mere thought that she might refuse him. The girl tried to tell him something, but Alexander interrupted her with a kiss. She screamed, asking him to wait. Kissing her on the cheek, he asked what his sister wanted to tell him. She only managed to say that he had lied. But he again interrupted her speech with a kiss, and the girl thought that he had never seen her as a sister. The girl no longer even tried to resist. She completely succumbed to her feelings. The door opened and Ophelia entered the room. Henrietta, who was putting things in order there, saw her. She was delighted and said that her mistress had finally arrived. At that moment, Henrietta saw that the lipstick on Ophelia's lips was smudged, and she modestly inquired about where my lady had been. Smiling, Ophelia added fuel to the fire and said so, that Alexander had it. Henrietta was not ready for such an answer, and not knowing what to say in response, only asked if the girl had spent the whole night with him. Henrietta remembered that as a child, she had magical abilities and could easily defeat an outstanding knight. However, the abilities that she was so proud of turned out to be nothing compared to the power of Ophelia. Henrietta first noticed Ophelia's strength the night after the funeral of the Duke and his wife. Worried about how lonely Alexander was that evening, she went to his room and waited for him there. She thought why Alexander did not return for so long, because it had already been a long time. She heard some sounds on the street and went to the window. On the street, the girl saw Alexander and Ophelia. She knew that my lady was going to leave, but she could not understand why the gentleman was with her. Why did he try to stop her? And then one day she found the account book of the Arpad family in Mr. Adrian's room. The girl did not understand how she got under his bed. Having found the book, the girl realized what a brilliant idea it seemed to her. She thought about the fact that she was in Mistress Ophelia's room quite often, since she was her personal maid. And without any difficulty, she would be able to get her hair and throw her hair into Alexander's office. The girl hoped that she could get rid of Milady in this way. But events unfolded completely differently, and at that moment the maid realized that Ophelia possessed magic on a completely different scale. The girl was forced to grovel before her mistress for 3 whole years and study magic at night in order to increase her strength. Each time she rejoiced at her success like a child, and one day she decided that this was enough to overcome Ophelia. One day she accidentally overheard a conversation between Alexander and Ophelia, in which he wondered whether, after so many years spent together, he really meant nothing to her. The girl wondered why Alexander was sobbing on Ophelia's shoulder. She did not believe that this was really the Duke. She thought about how she had fallen in love with him, such a daring, rich young man with a cold gaze. She couldn't understand why he was crying so absurdly now, clinging to another woman. She worked so hard to get into this house. She was forced to give up so much just to be near him. She refused the Duke's offer to pay for her studies just to be close to this guy. All this time, she was forced to endure ridicule from other maids. They constantly whispered behind her back and said that Alex no longer even looked in her direction. And she realized that he really wasn't looking at her anymore. He had a different interest. He didn't even try to listen to her, and now he's standing in Ophelia's arms and crying in front of her. She was indignant because her beloved agreed with Ophelia on almost everything, listened to her very often, and was simply afraid to say something unnecessary so as not to offend her. Henrietta did not know what to do better, because she planned to attack her mistress in her sleep. But she could not do anything while Alexander was with her. She hated to think what they could do while alone. Alex can hold her in his arms all night and whisper to her about his feelings. She thought that unimaginably terrible things were happening behind closed doors, and she must prevent this at all costs. She is not ready to put up with what is happening. After talking with Alexander, Ophelia went downstairs because she heard some sounds there, and Henrietta decided to attack her. But Ophelia was still stronger than her and simply absorbed all the girl's power. Ophelia was disappointed in her. The girl realized that all 3 years of her efforts were a waste of time, but Ophelia promised her that after she left, Henrietta would be able to take her place. After the incident, the maid was so depressed and deprived of strength that she could not leave her room for several days. She assumed that this might happen one day. Alexander really was in love with Ophelia. He fell in love with Ophelia at first sight, just as she once fell in love with him. It was obvious, even though he tried to ignore the strange tension between them. All his attempts were in vain. He could no longer hide his feelings. Passing by her in the corridor without noticing it, he always stopped and followed her with his gaze. The servants gossiped, suggesting that there was something between them. Some clarified that the girl was never included in the family register, and as such, they are not brother and sister. They said that as long as the young master wants this, she will be next to him. And Henrietta only hoped that all this would not happen. Every day, the servants' whispers grew more and more, but Henrietta believed that as long as Alex had doubts about Ophelia, she had a chance. Alex often asked her to report to him on his sister's movements, and she thought about what he needed. She thought that she had done the right thing by melting the welds.